A radio show host in Seattle called Paul Gallant.
You are definitely living in the hindsight world today, Paul.
Do you feel there's been a consistent theme with the interceptions?
I think every interception really has a different story.
I was just kind of curious what Paul gets to say.
You got f***ing grow, mother. Are you kidding me?
Paul Gallant, what the hell is wrong with you?
Hello and welcome aboard another episode of the Gallant Says podcast. Generally available wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. We haven't posted the last couple of them. I heard some audio issues and I couldn't really figure out how to fix them. But those days are done. You can also watch this thing live, twitch.tv/GallantSays, youtube.com/Paul Gallant if you want to interact with the show or ask me anything on the fly. It is Tuesday, January 17th of 2023, and it seems that my Lord and Savior, Tom Brady, and his time with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is over after a dominant 31-14 Dallas Cowboys victory over Tampa Bay last night. That game was never a game unless you want to count the first couple of ugly sequences of offense to open things up. But once Dallas's offense got cooking, you knew the Bucs weren't going to be able to do much. They got to throw all game long. Tom Brady, behind that offensive line that's not very good, even if Ryan Jensen was back, was going to have to throw it 40 to 50 times. And that Cowboys pass rush is just too good to not make Brady's life a living hell. And that's what they did. Brady did look like he's 45 years old, and we'll talk about the Cowboys a little bit more later. But most of you are concerned about my well-being, about where I'm at, because Brady didn't play well. And Brady finally lost the game. Eddie on YouTube comments, it doesn't matter because Tom Brady is washed. Well, I don't know about that. I mean, maybe if you gave Tom Brady a better offensive line and some wide receivers who can actually catch the ball, looking at you, Mike Evans. Looking at you. Anybody else who might have dropped a pass last night so I can further my argument. Hey, running backs. Leonard Fournette gets all that rest. What did he do last night? They don't have a Rob Gronkowski at tight end. Defense, so they try so hard. Offensive coordinator Byron Leftwich might get fired. Head coach Todd Bowles, is he even good at coaching? I mean, there's lots of reasons not named Tom Brady that the Bucs lost last night. I mean, it's not like Brady's done. It's not like his career is over. No. He just needs a change of scenery. You are just haters if you think otherwise. Serious note, he did not look great. There were a couple of throws that he had in the end zone, and I was wondering, who the fuck was he throwing that to? And I'd love to blame it all on pressure, but it does feel like Father Time has finally caught up to Tom Brady. That said, unless Troy Aikman was hinting at a deep conversation that he and Brady had, quarterback to quarterback, that Joe Buck was unaware of, because at the end of that broadcast, Aikman did say, well, thank you to Tom Brady if that's the last time he ever laced him up, and Joe Buck seemed to slightly push back on it. Unless they had some sort of conversation that was behind closed doors where Brady said, yeah, I'm done, to Aikman, I have a hard time buying that he's going to walk away. Because now I look at him and I'm like, he's obsessed with football. He wasn't Peyton Manning level washed or Brett Favre / Tony Romo level broken, Drew Brees, Ben Roethlisberger. There have been moments where he has looked good over the past year. This season has just felt as if he's been distracted all year long, and it's a convenient excuse, right? Divorce. There's the FTX situation as well, where he is one of the principal initial investors. There was a lot going on for him off the field. And maybe his focus wasn't where it needed to be. But I do think he's going to be elsewhere next year. The real question is where. So there are some free agency odds that were put up. I think this is from bookies.com. Plus 350 for him to end up with the Las Vegas Raiders. So 35-1. Plus 450 for him to end up with the Miami Dolphins. It's not 45-1. It's like 4.5-1. I forget how this works. Plus 500 to end up with the Niners. Plus 600 to end up with the Patriots. Plus 750 to end up with the Bucks. Plus 800 to retire. Plus 900 to join the New York Jets. I swear to God, if that last situation happens, I'm going to fucking lose it. If he ends up on the Jets. I think of all those possibilities, the one that's most likely is probably going to be the one that keeps him closest to the East Coast and his kids. So that means the Jets are in play. I suppose the Patriots are too. But I think it's most likely that if he goes anywhere, it's the Miami Dolphins. And that's what's really tricky right now, because you're hearing coming out of Miami all things that would lead you to believe otherwise. They're endorsing Tua Tagovailoa publicly as their starting quarterback of the future. But it's hard to believe Tua is ever going to play a full season again, let alone just play at all. I have a hard time envisioning that. And I think the Dolphins, who have flirted with Tom Brady before, and also flirted with Sean Payton and Tom Brady simultaneously, I think that is still a possibility. It's nothing against Mike McDaniel really here. I have some issues with Mike McDaniel. I feel like he's passed the buck a lot when it comes to the clock management that you saw Wild Card Weekend, when it comes to his handling of Tua Tagovailoa's concussions as well. Oh, our medical staff is in charge there. There are some things to point out with McDaniel, but I do think he should stick around for a second year. And I think just looking back at recent Dolphins history, they've shown that they don't give a shit. They'll fire somebody right away. They fired Brian Flores after not too long, and it wasn't Brian Flores' fault that team stunk. It wasn't his fault. They're practically trying to tank. So if they tried to get Brady and Peyton before, why wouldn't they try to get Peyton and Brady again? Stephen Ross is a billionaire. He was stopped in his quest, and yeah, he got punished and fined and things like that, but he doesn't give a shit. He's a billionaire. Not a very smart one when it comes to running a football team, but there's definitely a chance that he'll try to make this happen. So if I'm betting on anybody, I think it's going to be Miami. I do think, and we talked about Lamar Jackson and the Ravens yesterday, I think the Ravens are somewhat interesting. I don't know the Ravens' financials off the top of my head, but say they decide to franchise Lamar Jackson and trade him somewhere else. Say Brady's on the open market. That is a short-term fix for a team that's pretty good. You need to upgrade the receiving core, but I think that's a fun alternative possibility that's not even on the board right now. I don't know what the Ravens are going to do with Lamar Jackson. We didn't even get this into yesterday's show, but you might have seen that Lamar Jackson posted essentially the kind of thing that you used to see back in the day on AOL instant messaging as an away message. It read like this: when you have something good, you don't play with it. You don't take chances losing it. You don't neglect it. When you have something good, you pour into it. You appreciate it. Because when you take care of something good, that good thing takes care of you too. Just fucking say how you feel, dude. Enough of this passive-aggressive shit. You're one of the best quarterbacks in the league. You're a former MVP. Just say, I wish y'all respected me more. Instead of quoting it as if you're reading this out of some sort of self-help book or something like that. Looks like you stole it from some influencer's caption as they have a floss G-string up their ass, posing and trying to give you some deep tidbits. The only thing deep is the G-string itself. Anyway, I think that could be a possibility for Tom Brady. Baltimore. Let's look at the other side of the Monday night playoff game between the Bucs and the Cowboys, who won 31-14. You should be feeling a lot better about the Cowboys going forward because they were able to shake off that awful Week 18 performance against the Commanders. It's Week 18. It's a rather meaningless game, not entirely meaningless. They did have a chance to potentially get the 1 seed in the NFC or to at the very least win the NFC East, but they looked like shit last week. And I would say don't put too much into the victory that the Cowboys put together because this Buccaneers team has been largely fraudulent all season long. I'm just saying they did put together a really complete performance with their first road playoff victory since 1992. That's one thing. Number two, you're looking at a team in the Cowboys who had never beaten Tom Brady. I suppose that we're looking at a different Tom Brady now, but there's some credit there. They did it in their unlucky Navy uniforms, and they did it with all of this pressure on the backs of Mike McCarthy and Dak Prescott. I mean, Dak Prescott's getting asked about Mike McCarthy's job security before a playoff game against an underwhelming sub-500 team. And Dak said, look, we've had back-to-back 12-win seasons. We just create a safe space for us. He also acknowledged that, hey, we're judged off of wins in the playoffs. And the last time we saw the Cowboys in the playoffs against the San Francisco 49ers, Mike McCarthy and the boys looked completely undisciplined, and they end the game with that awful, hey, let's scramble, oh shit, we ran out of time moment, and ultimately lose to Jimmy Garoppolo and the San Francisco 49ers. They should have won that game. So I think doubts about the Cowboys, they're warranted, they're fair, but they played great last night. Dak Prescott, that's the best game of his career. It was. I was really surprised by how well Dalton Schultz played in the game. Schultz is somebody that I picked in fantasy football this year, and I thought, oh, this is possible with Schultz in this Cowboys offense. If CeeDee Lamb takes another step forward, and if they can figure out a number 2 wide receiver, which has been an issue. I mean, T.Y. Hilton's getting regular snaps. Dropped, I think, his first pass thrown his way on the game. It was good coverage by the Bucs on that play. Prescott played great. Is that something I believe he can do regularly? I don't know. I mean, the best playoff game that we saw Prescott play was back in 2018 where he helped beat the Seattle Seahawks. Since then, there haven't been that many Cowboy playoff appearances to speak about. But I look at Dak, and I think that this was a significant step in the right direction. He just has to find a way to stay consistent, and it's going to be really hard to do that against a damn good San Francisco 49ers defense that eventually got to Geno Smith in that game that we saw on, Saturday. Eventually, they made Geno Smith's life very, very difficult. And speaking of Geno Smith, it's been interesting to see on the Seattle part of my timeline what people are thinking about when it comes to what the Seahawks should do at quarterback. Conventional wisdom, especially for an organization that did not want to tank, get the best possible draft pick this season, is that you go into next season with Geno Smith again as your starting quarterback. And that makes sense to me. I mean, they have the 5th overall pick. They theoretically could end up with one of the top quarterbacks in the draft. It could be C.J. Stroud. It could be Will Levis. Maybe for some reason Bryce Young isn't the first quarterback taken off the board. Like, they have an option there. And they should leave themselves some wiggle room to use that option to find the quarterback of the future. But yeah, I think you want to keep Geno Smith around. Geno Smith says he wants to finish his career here. I wouldn't go that far. The Seahawks said they've had preliminary discussions with Geno Smith. They would use the franchise tag if they can't re-sign him. I think they should use the franchise tag if they can't re-sign him. Hell, I think they should just give him the franchise tag. Easier said than done if you take a look at the Seahawks cap situation, because you're probably going to end up paying close to $40 million for a year. I just think you got to remember what you did with Matt Flynn. You gave Matt Flynn that contract back before Russell Wilson won the job outright. And it's not like it was a $100 million contract or anything like that. But Matt Flynn with the Seahawks signed a 3-year, $19 million deal. You're not going to be able to get Geno for that. Like, you would wish that you could. But today, with the franchise tag number being what it is, Geno's going to want something north of $20 million, and is probably going to get something like $30 million. We saw the Tannehill extension a couple of years ago. I just think that the Seahawks have to be very careful to not marry Geno Smith here. It was a fun year, but didn't we all see the limitations of Geno Smith down the stretch with the Seahawks? Didn't we all see that the odds are against him being the kind of quarterback that can, at the head of this team, lead them to the playoffs and have them win games in the playoffs? They got in the last weekend of the year because the Packers couldn't win a home game against the Detroit Lions. That's why Seattle got in. And he played poorly, I thought, for much of the last couple of months of the year. Did he have a perfect or close to perfect first half against the 49ers in the playoffs? Yes. And Seattle had a brief lead because of that. But it didn't last, and you never expected it to last. So I think that's something you got to think about if you are the Seahawks. You got the 5th overall pick, and you got to be very careful, I think, about locking yourself into Geno Smith with a contract that's difficult to get out from underneath. Because you've seen how that can affect a team pretty quickly after the deal is made. All right, guys, we are now at a point in the Gallant Says podcast where we're going to shift into talking about something new that's on TV. If you listened to me back in the day on the Spoiler Alert podcast, you would hear Jim Mudd and I recapping episodes of a TV show called Game of Thrones. You may have heard of it. Also, another TV show called The Walking Dead. That was what the premise of the podcast was. Those two shows doing recaps after the episode came out right away. So, I watched HBO's The Last of Us, episode 1. But I want to make it clear to everybody who doesn't maybe want any spoilers that now... That's the spoiler alert horn a little bit louder than I would have liked. Let's play it again. Now is probably a point where you should just be aware. We might be giving some spoilers in just a second. I don't know if that actual sound effect did play here. Waka Flocka Buck says, give us some new insight on the Texans' new uni PowerPoint you saw. Here's all I could say. There's a secondary logo that they are looking at, and it's going to be something that's very, very easy to wear on a hat. And there might be another color getting added into the fray. But maybe not. I don't know. They just presented a PowerPoint, and there were a lot of details as to why they were thinking about making some of the changes that they're thinking about making, and it all made a lot of sense to me. So if you're watching on twitch.tv/GallantSays or youtube.com/Paul Gallant, you'll have seen there. So, episode 1, we open up in Austin, Texas for this episode of The Last of Us. And you get a cold open with a 1960s television show where a scientist talks about the possibility of fungi taking over people's bodies, using them as a host, if you will, and a pandemic that could potentially take over the whole world. Then we go to Austin in 2003. Thought it was a nice little touch to have the guy who plays Buddy Garrity on Friday Night Lights as a next-door neighbor of two characters, Joel, played by Pedro Pascal, and Sarah, who seems like she's going to be a really key figure in this television show. And it's a slow but a tense build. You start watching and you think to yourself something bad's going to happen. From the get-go, you're just not sure as to when it's going to happen. So, Sarah is Joel's daughter. Joel is a single father, it seems like right now. And I think his friend, I'm not sure the relation. Tommy is somebody who is regularly in their life. They have breakfast in the morning. Joel and Tommy go to work. And Sarah, who seems like a sweet girl, goes up into Joel's room, finds a drawer with a little bit of money in it, and does a sweet thing, goes to downtown Austin to go get her dad's watch fixed using some of Joel's money. And you notice like some shit's happening in the background. You know what's coming. She clearly doesn't. And I thought they did a really good job of laying that out. Some people are more paranoid than others. And I'm just thinking about being in Sarah's shoes where I'm, I don't know, 13, 14 years old. I'm watching TV with my dad before going to sleep. I wake up, it's 2 a.m, and everyone is freaking out, specifically a dog in the neighborhood. Felipe Ramirez asks if I've played the game, Paul, on YouTube. That's pretty much the intro of the game. I have not played the game. I actually want to play the game right now because then all of a sudden, the old lady next door, who we think is a vegetable, is eating people, like just biting into their neck. And I'm assuming infecting. I don't know the specifics. I don't know how it works. I haven't played the video game. My understanding of this universe is going to come entirely from walking into it blind. I like that. I know that some people out there like having played the video game, and they like that there is an element that you can know what's going to happen in advance. I don't know. I like when I'm watching TV shows, if it's based off of a universe that is successful already, I'm going to go out of my way to put on my blinders and not figure out what's happening. But anyway, as that opening scene continues, shit hits the fan, and I thought that the episode did a great job of showing the collapse of society from the perspective of just a couple of people over just about, 20 to 30 minutes of time. I thought they did a fucking great job of that. And ultimately, we see Sarah, who seems like she's being set up to be a major character in the show, dies. Fucked up. And you can understand right away that the character of Joel is going to be fucking broken from here on out. A great setup. You think that this guy's just going to be a sad sack the rest of the way. And you know what? When we first see him 20 years later, they're in Boston. It is exactly that. Joel is dealing drugs in Boston while doing basically whatever job pays. Shoveling shit, picking up dead bodies, tossing them in a fire in this quarantine zone. Downtown Boston. Looks like it's right off of the Mass Pike. It's interesting that they chose that location. Anyone who's played Fallout 4, the video game, you might recognize, like, yeah, that's kind of similar vibes. A post-apocalyptic Boston with buildings blowing up and all over the place. Like, that was kind of the vibe I got. I've played Fallout 4 somewhat recently. So Joel's dealing drugs, and he's selling drugs to the guards there. So we know Joel's a bit of a broken man, and he's got a lady with him. The lady is the actress from Fringe. I never got her name. Actor characters. I'm looking it up online, sorry. In HBO's Last of Us. This way I can figure it out. This is going to take me some time to remember character names. So, Teresa is Joel's, like, boo thing. We're introduced to Teresa where she is being tortured by some rando gang members of sorts. And all of a sudden there's a bombing outside where these gang members are. She escapes, and we learn about this terrorist group / rebel group called the Fireflies. We don't get a whole lot at first, but the general premise is they don't like the quarantine government. And as we get a little bit further in, they seem like they're on the verge of skipping town. There's a character that we are first introduced to as Veronica. She's played by the actress who plays Lyanna Mormont in Game of Thrones, Bella Ramsey. Fun actress, very feisty. She has been in a lot of things recently. She was awesome in her brief spots in Game of Thrones, one of the better moments of the last couple of seasons are all the ones that involve her, including when she kills a giant while dying. She has some sort of higher purpose, and you're teased that there's something that she does. And as someone who has watched parts of Children of Men, which the premise of that movie, I believe, is that all of a sudden people can't have kids anymore. But she's told by this character named Marlene, who is the leader of this Firefly group, that she can't tell anybody about said higher purpose because she'll die. And you're like, what the fuck's going on here? And I was wondering, like, oh, all of a sudden people can't have babies anymore. What's going on? I haven't played the video game. We go a little bit further and we realize, okay, that radio is a means of communication. And Joel is looking for Tommy, who got arrested, I guess, the night everything hit the fan. And also is, I guess, someone who went exploring west and no one ever heard from him again. So since Joel hasn't heard from him and is regularly slipping out of town, he decides, you know what? We got to go to Wyoming, I guess, to find some radio tower where they think that Tommy is. But they need to have a battery for a truck so that they can drive. And they can't get it. That's what Teresa had been trying to get from those gangsters, we come to find out. Anyway, as we're introduced to Veronica and Ellie, Marlene, the leader of the Fireflies, goes into this, I guess, interrogation/prison room, and they talk. And Marlene's like, yo, you're a big deal, Ellie. I'm not sure how long she's known Ellie is a big deal, but clearly they're aware that Ellie has some semblance of perhaps almost getting the virus itself, which is being run by the fungi, I guess. And after keeping her in quarantine all this time, they're like, okay, she's for real. So we need to leave Boston, leave the quarantine zone, and go somewhere else. And in some sort of firefight where they, I guess, fight off the battery people. I don't know what their deal is. The people that had been holding Teresa hostage. They run in to Joel and Teresa, who had snuck into this building trying to steal the battery away. So all of a sudden, you're seeing Ellie, who is this wild child, and Joel are going to be partnered in some way, shape, or form. And as they're about to leave, that's where things get interesting, because they realize that they're going to get probably killed for trying to leave the city. And Joel loses his mind when the kid is threatened, Ellie's threatened, and he kills the guard. Just kills him. And right after that killing happens, Teresa figures out, oh shit, Ellie's positive with the virus. And Ellie's like, no, don't. I can't get the virus. So hopefully I'm doing a decent job of explaining this, but she isn't sick. She isn't contagious. And they get out of the quarantine zone. And what we get at the very end, because Ellie's smart, she cracked a code that Joel is using to communicate on the radio, where they're using 80s music or to symbolize danger, 70s music, 60s music for other moments. And you hear an 80s song playing on the radio at the end, which I'm assuming is some sort of message about danger, but they're not getting it because they're outside of the city. So right now, all we know is that Joel, Teresa, and Ellie are about to go west. We don't know where they're going, but I thought that the show did a really good job of setting up a universe that I don't understand very much. I'll probably watch this episode again, and I can't wait for the next episode of this. And I'm still a little bit annoyed that Sundays during football season, HBO is trying to basically take them over. I think it's kind of bullshit. You know, we already had, like, House of the Dragon was largely taking place during the NFL season. I love Game of Thrones. Why can't you do this during the summer when nothing else is going on? But whatever. That's the choice that they made. It might be a little bit frustrating to have The Last of Us on the same night as the Super Bowl, among other nights and stuff. But I like the start of this show. I will give it an A- for episode 1, and we'll talk about it in greater detail next week on the Gallant Says podcast. But big thanks to everybody who tuned into today's edition of the Gallant Says podcast. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and That's it. And also youtube.com/Paul Gallant, twitch.tv/Gallant says. Appreciate y'all for tuning in. So long. Farewell. Have yourselves a wonderful Tuesday. We'll be back